Hello, I'm Tiffany Granaccia, the CEO of Kite Hill PR. We're going to talk today about how you can adjust your communications for the new normal. We've all certainly gone through a time of disruption through the pandemic, through social disruption, and we've changed our approach to communications, not only within the moment, not only the pivot we've already gone through, but we're setting up a new approach that will enable us to be more successful for the future as we continue to adjust our communication strategies. I'm joined with Laura Cameron in the UK. Hi, Laura.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us. As Tiffany said, I'm Laura, and I am living and working just outside of London, running the show for Kite Hill over here.
Great. So let's talk about who we are at Kite Hill. As most of you hopefully already know, we have been based in New York City, but now we're all over the US with our team that's spread out in the UK. We've been recognized for our approach to media relations and thought leadership, mainly for the technology, media, and advertising industries. People come to us because of our industry expertise. Our proactive and positive approach, always looking at the pivot, not only through the existing times that we've just gone through, but always thinking about the communication strategies that we have for existing clients and how we can execute on them in the way that's most efficient, and our passionate team of industry experts. But today is not about us, it's about the marketplace, and some of the key things that we're going to cover off today include, we're going to start with the top, we're going to talk about the media landscape and the impact that we've seen specifically on working with journalists, on media, on the overarching landscape that we've seen shake out over the past few months. Certainly, there's been a lot of change, so we're going to talk about that. That also means there's been a big shift in communication. So the work that we do has changed potentially forever, so we're going to talk about some of those key changes. Then we're going to segue over to how you should be adjusting your communication strategy, or at least things you should be thinking about if you're planning for the rest of the year, if you're doing broader planning now to think about execution. We have some lessons that we've seen from here in the US and internationally. We're going to take you through some case studies. And last but not least, we're going to open the kimono. We're going to show you how we've been getting it done here at Kite Hill PR, how we've been driving great results for clients overall. So let's start it off with Laura covering today's landscape.
Thanks, Tiffany. Yes, let's jump right in and take a deeper dive into the current lay of the land, because let's be honest, the past few months have not been straightforward. And so while we may not want to relive lockdown anytime soon on either side of the pond, understanding how our business world and society as a whole has shifted and has had to shift so quickly to adjust to this new time and the effect that it's had on businesses across the board is really crucial to making sure we can come out of this and move into the recovery period successfully. And we wanted to hone in on three key factors that we've seen that have basically, directly impacted the way that we're engaging and communicating. The first one comes as no surprise to most of us in this room. And that's because marketing is often the easiest, the first area of the business to come under close scrutiny. So as we entered lockdown, this is exactly what we saw. Businesses were entering survival mode, and we saw marketing budgets being reallocated across the business, reallocated across the business to accommodate for other priorities. We saw some marketing budgets were being cut altogether. And then some businesses were happy to just go into holding pattern to keep everything as is, sustain the activity, and wait it out to see what on earth was going on in the outside world. The second factor we wanted to talk about is directly related to the media. Since lockdown, we've seen a lot of staff furloughs where the government has stepped in to help businesses realign in this time of change without having to make mass layoffs. But that has certainly had its own impact, and the media has suffered from that, where they've had furloughed staff, overwhelmed newsrooms, and editorial teams that have been squeezed and totally wrung out in a way that they haven't seen before, and that added extra pressure to the journalists and the editors that we've been talking to. Lastly, but more close to home in a way is we saw PR and communication strategists having to pivot quite quickly in the wake of the pandemic to shift priorities to focus instead of on corporate branding and profiling. They had to shift to look at crisis and internal communications to make sure that businesses have been able to communicate effectively with the right tone to their audiences. So with that, it is not all doom and gloom yet, at least. So let's hope that that continues to be the case, because where there's change, there is opportunity. And the recovery phase is looking pretty positive right now for the UK market. So we at Kite Hill are taking this into consideration in everything that we do for our business and for our clients, and really feel passionate that now is the time to readjust your communication strategy. Your communication is business critical right now more than ever. Your clients and your customers have come out of this period with a sense of change and confusion. They want to know what you're doing to re-update processes and how you're figuring out how to handle things as we come into the new normal, as they say. So now is the time to do exactly that, to talk to them, to engage with them, and try to really give them a sense of calm and stability. As we gear up to the new normal, we have seen a media fatigue as well. But this isn't negative. This is actually quite good. We're coming off the back of a lot of news that has related to COVID and other recent social events. But now the media are starting to refocus, and they want positive news stories. They want to talk to companies that are embracing change in the wake of coronavirus, that are bold and happy to be bold, to go out there and set precedents. But on saying that, it is fair to say that we've, as a global society, changed our tune, and the media is no different. So yesterday's standalone corporate PR programs are not going to cut it. Marketing communication strategies today need to be woven into the fabric of our society. They need to be relatable and relevant and consciously aware and sensitive to surrounding communities, markets, and overall global economies.
That's a great point, Laura. And as you said, where there's change, there's opportunity, and that also is presented through a shift in communications. So let's talk about that communication shift.
Let's talk about that. Thanks, Tiffany. So the past few months have reinforced where our priorities should lie. And what we mean by this is that in the coming months, we're going to start to see the needle on our communications dial move from brand-focused PR to purpose-driven initiatives. So where company news and product updates and corporate thought leadership and messaging were underscoring everything that we had been doing, we're going to see that move to become more community-minded. It'll be even more important to have your finger on the industry pulse to keep pace with communities and markets that you're operating in, as well as the general overall mood of the country as the news agenda and updates are constantly changing. And so with those constant day-to-day changes, it's really important to take an agile and flexible approach to keep up with these, to work in 2-week sprints, for example, to make sure you're aligning with the current news cycle. And that's something that Tiffany is going to come on to a little bit later on. It's also really important to strike the right tone. We've said here, brave but sensitive communication. Make sure that your tone resonates with your customers' concerns at every stage of the communication process. It's really critical right now as we come out of this period. And as we've already stated, but again, it is crucial to be relevant and relatable. And only this messaging is going to resonate as we move forward. And last but not least, manage all of your communications carefully. Make sure that you're using everything that you have at your fingertips. Avoid hype, don't guesstimate, because now is the time to establish credibility within the business. And one of the best ways to do that is to use data and insights.
Such great points, Laura. Thanks so much. And we've started to see that as we think about the lessons mainly from the US that we've been driving forward in our client campaigns. So we can go into more details here and really tips that we're seeing based on the work and execution we're doing in the marketplace. One is demonstrate your commitment for the long term. Your clients want that reassurance. That kind of goes to our last point on the tips. They want that vision of hope coming from, if you're the CEO, if you're the senior leadership team, from the business overall. Now is the time to think about, how am I communicating what my company can achieve in the long term in the market within the shift that we've seen in the marketplace overall. So there's been a lot of changes within industries. It's all about adjusting your message, making sure it's relevant. So as Laura pointed out, there's opportunity that we can create off the back of the change that we've seen. One other thing that's very, very important when we think about the news cycle, and Laura talked about the media landscape and how it's changing, is the timing of the news. So as we think about, we've made that shift, we're communicators, we're going from brand driven to purpose driven, we've got a great announcement. It is important to think about, how am I going to evaluate the current news cycle? It's moving at such a fast and rapid pace, to make sure that the announcement that I have at my communication is right overall. So there's extra evaluation that you need to do that you might not have had to do in the past when it comes to planning out those existing campaigns. So it's very important to be agile and be able to react to a changing news cycle. So we talked about earlier in this presentation about how we can start to build brand trust and what we can use. That's going to be really important. So as we think about, how am I adjusting my communication strategy? What am I thinking about from a very big picture perspective? Whether I'm a media company, I'm a technology company, I want to focus on how I'm building brand trust. How am I going to make sure that that is paramount, that I have that credibility with my audience as they understand how my business is changing and becoming even more relevant to them. Another thing to keep in mind when you're adjusting communications campaigns within the new normal is to think about the marketplace. When you think about your marketplace and adjusting strategies overall, this isn't new news for the experts out there, of course. You're always thinking about how you can make sure that your message is relevant to the market that you're in, that you're operating in, that you have a team overall, but we want to make sure that you're really focused in. You're zooming in on the messages that you have. So while you can have that overarching global communication strategy, when you drill down by market, you're not only thinking about how I'm making it relevant to that marketplace from a business perspective, but you're taking into account how it's different from a cultural perspective as well. So that is very important as we continue to see things shift market by market. So it's all about authenticity and relevancy. So that also means there's a couple key takeaways when you're adjusting your communication strategy. First and foremost, you're being mindful overall in those communications. So to that last point, you're really thinking about the region, you're thinking about the community that you're operating in and any of the impacts on them. You're also looking at how society can drive demand. So thinking about how the impacts there overall, being aware of the news and sensitive to current events as they might impact the industry that you're in. And as we talked about, you're starting to use data to back up some of those points. So you might be thinking about, okay, I'm adjusting my communication strategy. I'm thinking about the market. I'm thinking about brand trust. I'm thinking about how my message is relevant. But what's that proof in the pudding? How are you backing up some of the broad trends you might be addressing, what you're seeing in the marketplace? How else can you build credibility? Now more than ever, media love numbers. They're hungry for statistics. They're hungry for the kinds of data that back up the stories and trends that we're seeing. So it's great that you might have a perspective about how your market is shifting. If you can back that up even more with data from your business, with other ways that you're seeing the business shift, then that can create more opportunity for you. And then last but not least, you want to think about if you're investing in PR within this time, if you're thinking about the new normal. And this last point, this last takeaway is very important. How are you connecting your PR to sales? So when we think about that, we think about using earned media. So if you're investing in PR, you're driving those headlines, you're getting that breakthrough, You're having those opportunities that are being created by your PR agency, but how are you thinking about that information and how it's being pushed out through your sales team? So that could be a big miss if you're not thinking about sales and social merchandising for the earned media that you're driving, because that can create more opportunities for you, for your business. It can drive more business leads, which is exactly how you should be thinking about your investment in PR right now. How is it going to help your company and drive your bottom line? Great. So let's talk about that proof in the pudding. What campaigns have we been executing on since March, and what have we learned? One great example is Unicast. In case you're unfamiliar, Unicast is a location data provider. They're a leader in contextualized location data. We started working with them in March. Yes, you heard that right at the beginning of the pandemic, at the introduction of everything that has changed with COVID-19. We started working with them in a very quick manner. Actually, we talked to them on a Sunday night. We had the program running on Monday morning. And there's a reason for that. That fast movement is not only that we were helping their business to adjust in a world that was changing around us, but they had some great data that was super relevant to what we knew journalists were looking for right in the moment. And that was all off the back of a scoreboard that they created. Here's an example, the Unicast social distancing scoreboard. You can go to their site if you want to see this live in action. You'll be able to see the data changing, really looking even changes in average mobility. You can see how states overall rank. And what we did was take this, we did a media exclusive. We had a more traditional earned media approach when we did the release and announcement around this dashboard, but then we went and took a local approach as well, both local and vertical. So we cut up some of the data, we pointed journalists in local regions to how different states were performing overall. Great tool and resource, very relevant data that we were able to continue to look at the news cycle, to newsjack, which is simply hijacking the existing news stories and inserting relevant points of your data and points into those stories. So a lot of great earned media coverage. Everything from broadcast to print to online stories that we saw across the board for Unicast. But one great thing about that is it's not only about the earned media results we saw, but Unicast, they saw some really significant business results off the back of that. About 1,000 new business leads came into Unicast off the back of the earned media that they've seen. So fantastic to see PR really making a difference, really driving results that matter. Another example is Mainad, which Laura will cover now.
Thanks, Tiffany, for that great example. It's always exciting to see where PR turns into business leads. But another good example is Mainad. And similarly with Unicast, for those of you who are not familiar with Mainad, they're a performance marketing company who are really looking to change the status quo within the marketing and advertising ecosystem to really help marketers be more effective with their campaigns. And that's something that's resonated quite well in this current climate. Also similarly to Unicast, we initially started working with Mainad right before the coronavirus pandemic hit. And we were initially talking to them about how they could break onto US soil. They're an Italian headquartered company. They have fantastic reach across the European and Asia Pacific markets. But the piece of the puzzle that's missing is the US market, which represents a lot of opportunity. And so we, in the face of the pandemic landing on UK and US soil, we had to have several discussions and counsel discussions with Mainad and the internal team there to understand if this was really the right time to open shop in a new market. What was so different and unique about this, this campaign and this launch is that in discussions with Mainad, we learned quite quickly that they had a lot of data at their fingertips. They had a lot of insights. And we looked at that data that was specific to advertising activity patterns across both the European and the Asia Pacific markets to understand what was going on and what the flow in that line of the graph looked like through lockdown times. So what we actually saw is that within Mainad's clients specifically, only 19% chose to pause their advertising during this period, which is not actually a big number at all. So we use that data and other statistics like that we took from Mainad's internal data to then project and get a better understanding of what the US market was going to look like, using markets like Europe and Asia Pacific that were already coming into COVID recovery. We could start to understand that the US is going to go in a similar way. Going through this data, it helped us really establish the right messaging and the right positioning for the company within the US market. And as we talked about throughout the presentation, this also meant that we could be more sensitive to the economic climate. We could be directly aligned. We could talk about how we understood what advertisers and marketers were facing in the wake of all of this. And we could put that performance-based messaging in the right tone into market. And the launch was extremely well received by the media, who, as we've said, are hungry for positive stories. A couple of really good pieces here. We saw coverage across Forbes, Advertising Age, loads of coverage in the US. We also had quite a bit of coverage in the UK market as well, looking at how a European company was launching into the US market and lessons learned and tips and best practices to do that in a time of crisis. And so it was extremely successful. The launch has helped Mainad really scale their business and carve out a new space for performance marketing.
That's such a great point, Laura. And one key thing that surfaced, and as we think about that as a case study, is that we had that peak of news that we were able to create with Mainad as a team around the launch, but then we extended the coverage of the company through thought leadership, whether it's working with the Forbes Council, which they're a part of, to earned media placements that we drove in Ad Age and other key publications in the US and the UK. So that's also another great thing to remind folks of as I think about this case study. It's not only about breaking through in one key moment, but through the examples with Unicast and Mainad, it's how do you extend that story? How do you continue to drive results over time to break through and get in front of those key audiences?
Yeah, that's a really good point.
Yeah, exactly. And how do we get that done? Well, you know as well as I do, Laura, but the folks tuning in might not. It's all about how we put things into practice and how we execute as a team. One key thing that we do is use inspiration from agile development, key principles used by anyone who's in the tech industry. You know exactly what we're talking about. We've adapted that, and we're the first to adjust it within the PR industry through Kite Hill's sprint model. So it's our PR sprint model. We put it into practice for anyone who's really interested in potentially using this workflow. It could also work for in-house communications teams. If you have a large in-house communications team, you want to think about how your team can move more quickly, how you can communicate. We're all working from anywhere now. It's no longer working from home, it's working from anywhere. We have folks all over, and we need to continue to ensure that we're collaborating, that we're communicating, and that we're moving really fast. When we thought about, even at the top of this presentation, we're thinking about how we're adjusting within the new normal, within a very quick communication cycle. So we're doing that through our model overall, and that is allowing us to go through quite literally a sprint to evaluate the plans that we have, and in that timeline, remove roadblocks or change the tactics that we have that might not work within an overarching plan, and then always pause to do a review and retrospective. So some of you might be thinking, well, how can I take this model and how can I really take the work I do as a PR professional or work with my key partners? Maybe you're thinking about working with an agency. Kite Hill could be the perfect agency for you. Thinking about how do we adjust communications tactics for something like Agile that needs a clear output. So these are some examples. It could be publishing a more timely byline. It could mean, we talked about newsjacking before, getting that expert commentary and stories and pivoting and moving through the sprint by thinking about how am I going to capitalize on key headlines and news. It could also mean the execution of pro-social messages, of help messages. When you think about that purpose message, the purpose-driven communications we talked about earlier. It could also mean that data-driven storytelling. So how am I thinking about any of these key things that we're going to evaluate? It's not only external communications, by the way, but we're also thinking more and more about external and internal, because your employees are one of your number one assets in telling your company story. So internal communications is also a big part of it. So that really covers everything that we wanted to talk about today, from the shift in the landscape over to how communications is changing, how we're becoming more agile, how we're thinking about authenticity. We talked about the move from brand-driven to purpose-driven communications. We dug further into the data. We talked about some great case studies and companies we've been working with to drive results within the shifting communications landscape, and how we're getting it done here at Kite Hill. So let us know how we can help. We're available. My email is just simply tiffany@kitehillpr.com. If you have any questions, if you want to learn more, please drop us a line. And thanks so much for tuning in today.